We are on Gadigal land. These lands have been cared for and nurtured by the Gadigal people for millennia, and sovereignty was never ceded. As we gather to share stories and knowledge, let us reflect on the incredible history of storytelling in this place. I pay my respects to elders past and present and to any First Nations people in the audience today. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to the State Library of New South Wales. My name is Lydia Tasker and I am the Head of Public Programs here at the Library. It's wonderful to welcome you here in person and online for this edition of the B-List Book Club. Please ensure your phones are switched to silent or turned off to ensure there's no interruption to the conversation tonight. In the unlikely event of an emergency for everyone here in person, we'll evacuate through the door through which you entered and exit the building via the Mitchell vestibule main doors, down the front stairs to an assembly point in the domain. Our security guards will direct you, so please follow their instructions. Our next B-List Book Club is with Catherine Hall, author of The Stranger, on Thursday, the 1st of September. Details are up on our website now, so I hope you can all join us. Tonight, we're discussing The Registrar by reconstructive plastic surgeon and now debut author Neela Janakiramanan. Books will be available for sale after the talk, so come and see me and Chris at the desk on the side if you'd like to pick up a copy. And just quickly, as this brilliant novel examines the world of healthcare, I thought I would mention the library's newest exhibition, Kill or Cure, A Taste of Medicine, which has just opened and features some of the library's rare books collections. Kill or Cure is an immersive exhibition looking at how Western medicine understood health, disease, and treatments from the 15th to the 19th century. It's a really incredible show, so I'd encourage you to check it out when you can. Our galleries are open until 8 p.m. tonight, or come back and visit us another time. So without further ado, over to you, Bree and Neela.
Thank you so much, Lydia. That's really cool about that exhibition. I didn't know about that. That sounds pretty good. Love libraries. Thank you so much, everyone, for deciding to spend your Thursday evening here with us at B-List Book Club, to those of us in person here at the library and to everyone joining us from home. On behalf of Neela and myself, I'd just like to second that acknowledgement. We are here with gratitude on beautiful Gadigal land. Sovereignty was never ceded and there has still been no treaty, which means that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are not only the traditional, but also the rightful owners of these lands. I am so thrilled to talk to you, Neela, tonight about your fantastic debut. This book ticks a lot of boxes for me. It is a riveting page turner. It's an expose of a toxic industry. It is a risk-taking debut written by a legend of a woman. In real life, Dr. Neela Janakiramanan is a reconstructive plastic surgeon with particular expertise in complex hand and wrist surgery. She has wide experience working in the public and private health sector. She is a seasoned public speaker and advocate on issues including health equity, gender equity, and diversity and inclusion. She was also one of the medical leads in the Kids Off Nauru campaign and in bringing together the Australian medical community and operationalising the Australian Medevac legislation to facilitate medical care for refugees in offshore detention. Neela is a regular contributor to Women's Agenda and has also written for The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, Saturday Paper, and often appears on ABC's The Drum. Please give her a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Bree.
My first question is a little bit of a, normally when I come to events like this and people ask this type of question, I think they're being a lazy interlocutor. But in this instance, I am really especially specifically curious. You write all the time for a lot of places and have for many years. You're an advocate about all of those issues I just mentioned. Why this book and why now?
In a lot of ways, it's something that's been on my mind for a long time. When I was a registrar, it's been many years since I've been a registrar, but when I was a registrar, I used to make up stories to amuse myself, almost like a little doll's house, a virtual doll's house. And some of those stories were real, some of those stories were just completely made up, but they were always sitting there simmering. And they were simmering on a background of frustration that there's very little medical literature to start off with. The only other comparable title I can think of is The House of God, which goes back to the 1960s. And even though people love medical drama on TV, it's very male-centered. If women appear in them, they're usually a sexy nurse, or they are, a crashing patient, and that's about it. And there's always a godlike man at the top who makes all of the decisions and gets all of the wins.
And is very sexy.
And is very sexy, or very disturbed.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Or both.
Or both.
Yeah.
Don't we love sexy disturbed
Sexy
men?
disturbed man. Can't get enough. Yeah.
So I found the simmering frustration that women are 50% of doctors, they're almost all of our nurses, they're almost all of our allied health workers, they are 50% of our patients, and yet there's no storytelling about women. And so I always had it in my mind that this was a story I wanted to write. The trigger point for it, what actually made me put pen to paper, was
all that spare time you had.
yeah, I wish. It was quite a tragedy, actually. I was talking to some friends one night, and I learned that someone that I had worked with had passed of suicide. And she had passed 6 months after I had last worked with her. And it was a time in both of our careers where we had just finished being registrars. We were new specialists, and we had shared lots and lots of stories about our time together. And I think, I mean, she's not the first friend I've lost, and I'm sure lots of people in this room have lost people in that way. You spend time suddenly thinking, should I have seen the signs? Should I have done something different? Was there something in those stories that should have, made me think this might happen? And so that's when I started the manuscript that night.
And how many years ago was that?
That was 4 years ago.
Can you introduce us to Emma, the protagonist of this novel, where she's at in her training, what the relevance of this hospital she's at, etc.
So Emma is 29. She's enthusiastic. She is smart. She's dedicated. She's found herself perhaps in a career that she didn't envision for herself, but has fallen in love with, and she wants to make a really good go of it. She wants to succeed professionally. She wants to be a good doctor, whatever that means. She's still trying to work that out, but she wants to be good to her patients. And she is now in her first year of training as a registrar. So for those of you in the audience, not medical, a registrar in our health system is a specialist in training. So it's usually a couple of years into their career. So you finish medical school, work in hospitals for a few years, and then work out what you want to do. And regardless of what specialty you do, whether it is a hospital-based specialty or a community-based specialty like general practice, you are a registrar for a period of time. So she's just gone through a very competitive process to be selected onto a surgical training program, in her case, orthopedics. And she is at the start of a set 5 years of training to become a surgeon.
Can you introduce us to her family too? Because, you just mentioned that this is not necessarily a career that she imagined for herself, but now she's in it. She loves it. She wants to make the best of it she can. Can you tell us about her father and then also her brother?
So Emma comes from a medical dynasty, if you will, and there are lots of dynasties in lots of professions.
Yeah.
Legal profession as well.
Yep.
And so Emma is the daughter of a surgeon, and a very eminent surgeon, one who was very high up in the hospital that she's currently working at and very high up in the profession itself. Her mother, on the other hand, is much more artistic. She doesn't come from a scientific background. And despite this, both Emma and her brother Andy have pursued a path not only into medicine, but into surgery as well. So she's in her first year of training, and her brother Andy is in his final year of training.
Can you paint a more full picture of the unique character that is her father? So it's the most diplomatic question I've ever asked in my life.
So Professor Swan is a fairly archetypal older male doctor. He is perhaps caring in his own way. Both Emma and Andy know that he loves them and that he wants the best for them. But perhaps he isn't very good at showing that. And his way of showing it perhaps is to demand that they conform to certain ideals, to be excellent, to work hard, to pursue their careers with a single-minded sort of dedication. He has very much bowed himself to the medical hierarchy and engages in this very patriarchal top-down form of leadership, which he emulates in his home life as well as in his work life.
Can you talk a bit about how surgery specifically is a whole thing? A couple of my friends who went into medicine, and I've watched them, specialize, go through like all of these rounds of different, more training, more specializing, moving hospitals. Surgery seems, of all of the kind of things that you can specialize in, to be like the most intense in a lot of the, I guess, toxic or old school thinking ways that you explore in this book.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think surgery is getting better.
Great.
I think all of medicine is like that. I think the problems are accentuated in surgery because of the work hours, the hours in surgery, right from when you're an intern on a surgical unit, right through to being a surgeon, is often in excess of what other specialties are doing. But in terms of that patriarchal professor at the top, driving juniors in a particular way, treating patients in a particular way, I think that this is a problem across medicine. I actually spent quite some time thinking about whether I was going to write a surgical main character or not, and whether I would choose another specialty, because I do feel that surgery cops a bit of a bad rap, particularly since 2015, where the issues of bullying, harassment and assault within surgery hit the mainstream media, and there was a lot of talk about it. But what has happened since then is the College of Surgeons has actually engaged in considering these issues, implementing education programs, trying to change culture, which has been partially successful, particularly with younger surgeons, incompletely with older people. But every other college has ignored the issue. And some of them, like obstetrics and gynecology, is one of the worst.
So ironic.
Yeah. In the end, I made a narrative decision to write a surgical trainee because it was what I knew best, and it was what I thought I could write authentically. I didn't think I could write a physician or an obstetrician in that situation authentically, but I do think it's a medicine-wide issue.
All right, coming back to your book now, something I found funny, I mentioned to Neela just before we began that there are so many things in this book that were just so analogous to the legal profession. A lot. We'll talk about it. But something I thought was really funny is that Emma's partner, Shamsi, is a lawyer, and even he's not as busy as she is. He's like this hungry lawyer trying to make partner. And I know what that looks like. And in his mind, she's the one with the high intensity career. Can you talk to us, I guess, a bit about their relationship? And also, though, I have a few questions here about caregiving, parenting, like what sort of stage of their relationship they're at.
So Emma and Shamsi have just gotten married. They have been together for a very long time. He has known since the very day he met her that this is a pathway that she wants to go down, although it's questionable whether either of them really understood what that would look like in practice once it started. And that's what really plays out as the story goes along, as they both discover the impacts of this work and the combination of his work and her work together on their relationship. Shamsi's a very patient, adoring, kind partner. And as Emma's distress and burnout progresses and she becomes more irritable, irascible with the world, She does what I suspect a lot of us do, which is to save the best of ourselves for our workplace and the people that we are not close to, and take out the worst of our behaviours on those that we think ought to or can absorb them.
On the 28th of July, you tweeted, "Stop equating professionalism with not having caring responsibilities." And in the book, Emma's brother has kids and his partner Laura seems to do most of the heavy lifting there. One of Emma's mentors, David, who we'll speak about more soon, has kids and his wife looks after them. Emma's own dad was essentially absent in the family home. All of the information Emma seems to have ever received about this profession she's chosen is that it is hostile to anyone who wants to be an active parent. How is she dealing with the question that her and Shamsi are now asking each other of whether or not they, not even whether they want to, but like, how could they possibly have a baby?
One of the things I reflected on as I was writing that narrative arc is what I was often told as a young medical student, a junior doctor, that surgery isn't compatible with having family, or it's not family friendly is usually how it's put. And I think what I thought at the time was, in my mind, it was all about pragmatics. Okay, it's not family friendly because you can't get to childcare pickup time, or it's not family friendly because you have to work weekends. What I came to realize much later is that that's actually code for, we don't want to see your caring responsibilities. It's not family friendly because you're not supposed to show the profession that you have children or aging parents or a partner that might have medical conditions or any of those things. You're supposed to pretend like these things don't exist. And that is what professionalism is within this profession. You can have kids, but you leave them at home. And that in some ways is possible for men to do, even if they have partners that have careers and they sometimes have to go and pick up the kids after school. It's very hard for women to do when you turn up at work with a swollen belly. Everyone can see that there is a baby right there and you are shoving your caring responsibilities in everyone's face. And I think that that is really what Emma is starting to discover. It's not just the pragmatics of how she and Shamsi are going to manage this family. It is the how do I do this in this environment where it is so toxic to women balancing other responsibilities.
What's the philosophy underlying that? What is that? Maybe there's something there where, you just mentioned it could be if a person has kids or if they have aging parents or they have a partner that that needs care. But there are also a couple of supporting characters in here who themselves have chronic health conditions that are just not accommodated by the profession. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of, in law, we would call it like the reasonable man, or just this sort of farce that a legal professional can be an objective, sort of omniscient decider of both fact and value.
I think, medicine and law are quite visible in these kinds of expectations. I think lots of other industries are as well. I think capitalism probably has a lot to do with it, with this, ardent bowing down to the altar of productivity and seeing people who have these other responsibilities as eroding their ability to accrue billable hours or see a certain number of patients or make themselves available to the organisation, whether it is a profit-making organisation or a not-for-profit organisation. So I think that because we don't value caring as a society, as evidenced by the dreadful pay and working conditions for anyone who has a more caring role, because there's no inherent value in it, we also don't value it when people who are in professional roles also have caring responsibilities. It's like, well, that's not important. Why are you doing that? This other thing that you do is the most important. You should do more of that.
I want to talk, I have a few questions here sort of specifically about sexism, as opposed to every other question that I ask everyone. Someone in the first chapter of this book asks Emma for a sponge bath because they think she's a hot nurse. Hypothetically speaking, how does a medical professional manage to give like a high quality of care to someone who has demonstrated that they're a dickhead?
I think there's two answers to that. I think there's the public answer and then what I tell you afterwards at dinner. At the end of the day, you learn very quickly that patients who are vulnerable, patients who come from a variety of educational backgrounds, baseline intelligence, educational opportunities, class, approach these interactions in a variety of ways. And sometimes the inappropriate behaviours you see are genuinely medical. So I've worked on neurosurgical wards where people have had brain surgery and it completely removes their, what we call your frontal function, which is the bit that says, don't touch that person on the backside, or, don't make lewd comments. And so you have these post-operative patients who are really behave in inappropriate ways, but they can't help it.
And how do you explain those behaviors manifesting in a significant portion of the population?
Well, maybe there's just that little veneer that needs to be taken away. But then you do have these other people who that is their baseline and that's how they treat everyone. And then you have everyone else who kind of thinks it's a funny joke, but they're actually feeling vulnerable. And so they're saying things that are a bit dumb. And I think in my mind, my line is safety. If I'm not safe in that interaction, then I will pass on providing care to that patient unless it's life or death. But when it is safe, you laugh, you ignore it, you work around it, you acknowledge that there is a power differential and you suck it up.
Let's talk about David.
Mm.
Perhaps first, can you introduce us to who David is, both like what sort of his professional level is, I suppose, and why Emma is so thrilled to have him as a mentor.
So David is the sexy male doctor. He is about 10 years out of being a specialist. He has very specific subspecialty skills. He's a very good surgeon. He's charming, he's kind, and he sees that Emma is a bit vulnerable. She's new, she's perhaps a bit naive, she's still trying to learn this environment. And he sidles up to her and takes her under his wing.
Every time I read about David, I just thought about Dyson Hayden and his associates. I would argue that, sorry, for those who don't know, that was the High Court judge who, an inquiry by the High Court found that he had been harassing at least 6 of his associates over many years. And we know that at least 2 other judges on the High Court knew about those allegations at the time and apparently did nothing. My opinion is that specific type of predatory behavior is like more common than it is not.
Yes.
Is that the case in medicine?
Absolutely. And I think I would go so far as to call it grooming. It is, powerful men. I mean, we obviously use that in a child sexual assault sense, but it's the same kinds of behaviours that men show when there is a power differential in the workplace. The process of not only ingratiating themselves to a young woman and demonstrating that they are strong, powerful, and intellectual equal, can show them the world, but also slowly extracting them away from their friends, away from their families, and making their whole universe be about them. And it becomes a little bit more grey when it is 2 adults, because the idea that both are able to consent to what is happening is much clearer than when you have underage people involved. But I do think that we don't talk enough about or recognize enough that vulnerability of young women, adult though they might be, in these very hierarchical environments.
Because there's also there's the sort of interpersonal, I would agree, grooming element of him being very friendly and being very in the, you know, for a long time, very supportive, like an emotional support for her. Meanwhile, sort of siphoning her away from her partner, like siphoning, you know, her support network, separating her in ways that we also now understand as a part of something like coercive control, for example. But there are also very demonstrable, real professional opportunities that he can give her.
Yes.
And so it seems to me like so many people around them can see what's happening. Why can't she? Or is that a silly question?
No, I don't think it's a silly question. I had long conversations with my sister about this, actually. And I think the challenge is for women in that environment, there is so much intellectual capacity that is expended on everything. It's not just what's this guy doing over here, but it's also this patient's about to die and I've got to help my sister-in-law make a birthday cake and I've got to do this other thing and this other thing and this other thing. And so every time that little bit of suspicion starts to twig, something else happens and you think, I'll think about that later. And then you put it off and then you think about it later and you put it off until finally someone makes a move and you've never thought about it. And you think, oh, shit, it's happening now. What am I going to do? I didn't think about this.
And then in the meantime, like Emma is getting opportunities to present research, opportunities to do like surgery, like sort of training maneuvers that other people in her position wouldn't be getting unless they were being groomed by the guy in charge.
Yep.
And it just like fosters this resentment towards her for getting those opportunities.
Yep.
Like, what is that just like an impossible position?
I think it's an impossible position. And so women are then put in this position of, I mean, particularly in these really patriarchal industries, women are not often given these opportunities without these kinds of bargains also being part of it, because there aren't as many female mentors in that space. And particularly going back, you know, maybe 20, 30 years ago, I went to a dinner with Gillian Triggs, who was talking about this. And she was talking about the whole Queen Bee thing, how when she was coming up through various law firms, they knew that in their cohort, only one woman would be allowed to progress. And so they had to fight with each other because of that scarcity. And then even when they came into that senior position, if they mentored another younger woman and she also progressed, well, they'd be booted off the top. And so they always knew it was this self-preservation. I'm sure lots of people in this room have had instances of wondering why the women above us didn't mentor us in the way that we now feel we can mentor people below us. But I think it's because that scarcity doesn't exist as much anymore. And so for women like Emma in this industry where only 5% of orthopedic surgeons are women and there are no female mentors, this is as good as it gets, maybe.
Do you feel like that is changing? Because I call it the myth of the trickle up effect in law, where it has been decades in a row now that we have had equal graduates from law schools. And when you start in the commercial law space, at least, it only takes 3 years for a wage gap to emerge. And it just gets worse. And then there are just fewer women the higher you go up. Is that the same in medicine?
I think medicine is a little bit different because there's no sideways pathways in medicine. There's no middle management and there's no, you can't go and work in a suburban law firm. You can't go and do in-house. You can't go and do journalism and do other things with your law degree. Whereas in medicine, you are a junior doctor or you are a specialist and there's no option to pause in between because there's no career pathway for someone who wants to be a registrar for the rest of their life. And I think this is what drives people in medicine specifically to press on, because You don't have a choice. But the converse of that is we are getting lots of women into senior leadership positions.
Yeah. I'm going to try and articulate this question the way I want to. Normally, it's a really cliche and borderline offensive question to ask a woman novelist in particular, like how much of the book is true or how much of the protagonist is like them, etc. But in this instance, you know, you've written a book about an industry in which you still practice. It's in first person. You also write elsewhere and about the issues that you explore in this book. Medicine is not only sexist, but it's also, of course, extremely racist. And I wanted to know why you didn't make Emma a woman of color. Why not, I guess, take the opportunity to explore that level as well?
There were two reasons. One was purely narrative. It was just too complicated. The additional layer of disadvantage in a storytelling sense, I was like, I'm not smart enough to do this. But the bigger reason, I think, really is that when people face challenges in any industry, medicine being one of many, it is often, and you point to these structural problems that affect people unequally. It's very easy to point a finger and say, but that only happens to women of colour. It doesn't happen to white women. It doesn't happen to white men. It doesn't happen to these other people. And then that often distills down to not the system is toxic towards these particular, intersectionally disadvantaged people. It's those people have something wrong with them. They can't integrate, they can't assimilate. That's why these things happen. And so I wanted to strip that away. And that's why Emma and Andy come from a medical dynasty. It's why they are white. They went to private school. They are rich. They are educated. They did ward rounds with their father when they were 4. They know how healthcare works. All the people in that hospital, they are the ones who should find this okay. And yet they are struggling. And at that point, I could say, these are the systemic structural problems.
God, this is just so analogous. It's uncanny. I also am dying to know why fiction, which I know is like a big sort of generic question, but you write in your own voice about a lot of these issues. Was it always the case that the first sort of major writing project would be fiction?
Yep. I prefer to read fiction. I don't mind really good memoir. But as generally as an art form, it's not what I reach for on the bookshelf. So for me, because I read a lot of fiction and enjoy it, it was just always the thing that I thought. But also, again, with memoir, with a story like this, firstly, a relatively private person, and there were lots of things that I didn't want to share. There are lots of people that I could have complained about for any number of reasons over the years that I chose not to. And I still don't want to.
Why not? It
because
feels really good.
Because I don't have any proof. And ultimately, what happens to women who make complaints and allegations without, basically someone with a video camera, taping and showing that that's what happens. I worked with the woman whose case caused the inquiry in the College of Surgeons at the time when those incidents happened. And I watched how those men destroyed her and destroyed her career. And so I think that I am brave in lots of ways, but that is not a bravery that I wanted to demonstrate. And finally, I think someone called this a novel of social protest, a reviewer, which I thought was really nice. But I think with memoir, it is very easy to dismiss that protest as the cantankerous whining of one person who didn't get exactly what they wanted, which is rarely what it is, but that's how it gets dismissed. Whereas I think with fiction, you can tell these more universal stories in non-confrontational ways. And what it has meant is that the people that I worked with, who are very curious as to whether or not they might be in my book, have actually picked it up and read it.
Yeah, you'd hope some people are rightfully shitting their pants. This leads me on perfectly to my next question, actually, which is that in my experience, men get to be whistleblowers, but women are snitches. Can you talk a little bit more about if there was any particular backlash that you were afraid of or that you are relieved to have avoided, or maybe, I guess, a bit more about what you were talking about in 2015? Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, I wasn't overly concerned. Again, with fiction, there is almost a cloak of invisibility that you can throw over yourself. This isn't about me. This is just a story. This happens to lots of people. And all the scenes in the book that I chose, because protecting patient confidentiality and that of my colleagues was important, everything that I chose is quite universal. They're clinical cases that happen to many people. We don't always drop things in parks, but in theory, that they are things that could happen to anyone. And similarly, the things that happen to doctors are relatively common as well. So I knew that I was safe in that this is fiction kind of sense. But the other thing is, I'm in a really privileged position now. I am a specialist. I'm the clinical director at my hospital. I'm well regarded within the industry for the core work that I do. And so I'm not worried that people think I'm trying to take anyone down. I think I can sit very comfortably in a space and say, it's just a novel of social protest.
Yeah, nice. How do you understand your work now in this? I feel like there's a growing body of literature. You've got a lot of the work by Nikki Stamp, and then also, as you mentioned, like Emotional Female by Yumiko Kadota. Do you feel like you're part of a growing stable of writers, I would argue, whistleblowing on this industry?
Yeah, I think it's really good. I think the more stories are told, the better.
We've spoken a lot about the grisly bits, but I want to know what keeps Emma in this profession despite the horrors. Let's bring it back to the book a bit. It's not just a kind of masochism driven and blind ambition, prove herself to dad. Like, there's a lot in there that, yeah, tell us, like, what does she love about her work?
I love my job. You know, even though I'm complaining about all of these problems, I love my job. I loved being a registrar. Some of the things that I enjoyed about being a registrar are things that I don't get anymore. That day-to-day teamwork, that day-to-day camaraderie and friendship, the sense of being a core part of a system and lots of people working together to solve problems and provide really good care is really powerful. And medicine in particular is really powerful. You have the opportunity to form very intimate relationships with total strangers.
Nothing like shared trauma.
That's it. And but even patients, you know,
share trauma with patients,
yeah,
like in a different way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They tell you their stories, they tell you their secrets, their desires, their hopes, in the most banal way. You know, my day-to-day is patients come in and they say, I have this problem with my hand and I need my hand because. And what follows is the thing that is most important to them, the thing that they identify as a person. And that might be a hobby or a caring responsibility or work or whatever it is. But that's the core of them as a person. And it's offered to you as just, you know, casually. And that is really satisfying. And it's hard to describe how intoxicating and satisfying that really is.
Yeah, intoxicating is an interesting word too, because I remember at the end of my year as an associate, I couldn't do that work for many reasons. But I still haven't left law because there's a very addictive sense of stakes. And I wanted to ask you about, I was really struck throughout this book, through the things that Emma loves about her job and the things she also hates about it, how much it felt to me like being a medical professional, being a doctor, being a surgeon, whatever it was basically like a superpower. It's like a combination of privilege and skill that gives you this extraordinary power over other people's lives. Do you think that with that power comes great responsibility, and how do you handle that?
Do you know the joke? What's the difference between surgeon and God?
What?
God doesn't think she's a surgeon. So yes, I think lots of responsibility.
But like, tell us, I feel like you are a shining beacon of an example of somebody who uses that immense privilege and power for good. Does that for you is that part of the job? Like, does that go hand in hand? You've just always sought out ways to flex that muscle for altruistic purposes.
When I was in late medical school, one of my grandfathers, I had two, like most people. One was a doctor. The one who was not a doctor was much older. He was into his 90s at that point, and he used to send me letters that he typed up on his typewriter. And one of the letters that he sent me was shortly before he died. He said, as you go forwards on your path of being a doctor, always keep in mind that listening to your patients and being kind to them is 50% of their treatment. And that is something that I've held very close to my heart for my whole career, because I've been a patient. I'm now the parent of a child with a chronic disease. And so I know what it's like on the other side of the curtain. And it's easier for me as a doctor to navigate this mysterious, clumsy, fragmented, siloed, challenging health system. And every time I have to do it, either for myself or a family member or a friend, I think, how do normal people do this? And that's the other thing that I try and keep in my mind, is that most people are doing this without a guide, without someone who can tell them, how to get through.
Something Emma talks about from the beginning of the book, and that something that frustrates her about a lot of her colleagues, is treating patients like human beings, instead of speaking about them to other medical professionals in front of them. And even the way, I think there's like a detail somewhere where the way they talk about bodies that they'll operate on being like table number 3 instead of person whose name is, etc. And then there is, I would say, a deftly handled creep through the book of, as Emma becomes more burnt out and basically just so thinly stretched, she starts becoming the thing that she hated. Is that, I suppose, exactly what you were going for? And would you say that's a common thing? I think, is that something that stresses you out?
I'm glad you noticed. I had worried it was too subtle.
Oh, no, I thought it was perfect. It was perfect.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that, again, when your emotional capacity, your intellectual capacity is overloaded, any person will choose what they want to focus on. And some people will choose to focus on their values with regards to other people, and some people will choose to focus on self-preservation. And particularly in a system where certain behaviours are not only tolerated but valorised, and those behaviours also are self-preserving in certain ways. I think in my moments of sympathy and empathy, I can see how people become like that. I remember at the start of my registrar training, having this long list of things that I would never do. Never, ever, ever would I do those things. And then by my last term of surgical training, I remember, you know, growling at a junior doctor from a country hospital who'd woken me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I hadn't slept in possibly years at that point, just going, why are you calling me? And thinking, oh, I swore I would never do that. And now I understand why they did that then. So I think it is something that we've all got to be vigilant about. And one of the known impacts of burnout is that irritability and lack of sympathy and empathy that gets eroded. And so, but you can't, again, point to individuals and say, you've got to be better, you've got to be more resilient. I think that's why we have to change the system so that people can be the best version of ourselves, while also ensuring that the system sets expectations of what correct behaviour is.
I have a couple more questions for Neela, and then we will go to audience questions. So please bring any burning questions you have to the fore of your mind. For anyone watching from home, you can type questions into the Q&A function, and I will monitor those as well. For people who haven't yet read the book, without spoilers, you know, we've talked a lot about the themes in the book. We've talked a lot about the characters. We've talked a lot about the profession. How would you describe the sort of narrative propulsion? What are we working towards a climax here? What's the sort of I felt it to be a page turner. What do you think was driving that sort of compulsion?
I think it reflects every day in a hospital. I think even though it is a little bit episodic, that's kind of what happens on a day-to-day basis. There's a thing, and then you start to think about that thing, but then the next thing happens, and then you think, oh, I should think about that thing, but then there's that other thing that happened a week ago that I also haven't analysed. And then the next thing is already happening. And so you're just lurching from one thing to another, and some are adventures and some are misadventures. And you have your high points and your low points, but there is this inexorable movement and drive that just pushes you on.
In an interview recently, you said, and I quote, "The intersections of medicine and writing and broader advocacy, there is a lot more overlap than people give each of those things credit for." What does that mean? And I suppose also what's next for you? What does that mean in your sort of profession moving forward?
Yeah. I love storytelling. I love listening to stories, and I love telling stories. And I think that stories are ultimately what will change the world. We hear a lot about statistics around, you know, particularly in the healthcare industry, the gender pay gap, the gap in the number of women in certain professions, the suicide rates, the mental health, you know, burden. But we don't often get an opportunity to explore impact. And it's the impact on lives that I think ultimately changes hearts and minds, because they're what spur us to act on behalf of our patients. It's the stories they tell us that get to our soul, and we go, okay, I'm going to have to address this. And that's certainly what happens with Jackie, the patient in the book, is she has this enduring power over Emma because of where she has come from and the person that she is, not because of the trauma that she has. And so I think that's where I see the intersections of medicine, advocacy, and storytelling. I think the best advocacy is storytelling. I think that all clinicians are advocates at all times, whether we're advocating for our patients or for the health system or even for ourselves, and that stories are the way to get there.
Beautiful. Thank you. Perfect time to open up for audience questions. There's always a lag at the beginning and then there are too many hands at the end. So can I please? Yes, wonderful. Thank you. And if Neela, sorry, if you could repeat the question for the
Yes.
people watching at home
Yes.
when you answer.
The question was, how did I fit in writing a book? I think we find time for the things that we think are important or enjoyable or both. And in this case, writing this was important to me and it was also enjoyable. And so I made time for it and my husband picked up the pieces.
Is there, yes, please, this one.
So I first started writing it about 4 years ago. I wrote probably the first 10 chapters, and then I ran into a problem, which was that my life was pretty good and I couldn't write things that were hard and sad and terrible. And so I sat on it for a bit. And then I got involved in a lot of refugee work, and 18 months of that was extremely traumatizing and pulled me back into that darker space of being a registrar. And I think I wrote the remainder of that first draft in about 3 weeks.
We'll take 2 more here and then I do have a couple from online. The woman with the stripes first and then woman in front of her. Thank you.
I think the summary of that question is, how do you cope on the bad days with all of the bullies and the people who are gaslighting you? I think that that is a real thing in professional workplaces, of people taking your work, devaluing it, undermining it, and making you feel like you're not very good at your job. How did I cope? I left to have a baby whose name should probably be procrastination, because I literally had him so that I would get a year off. I spent a lot of time, that year off actually was essential because it made me really reflect on my own value and the way that other people had made me feel, and find again value within myself and the confidence to go back and go, no, I'm not that person, I'm this person. And I know from burnout research that that is absolutely the number one and possibly only treatment for burnout is rest and time away, which is often actually the hardest thing to achieve. Apart from that, friendship, I think, is the core of it, of having colleagues and people to share stories with and rely upon.
Please.
I suppose my question is, while you wrote the last 2 questions, and I am even though I haven't read the book so much of the talk about there have been a number of books that have come out recently. Some of them I've read. I don't think I'm ready. Even though it's so my question to you is, but given that you deal with what's not like how did you feel writing when you came to those parts where
Yep.
took you back? You know,
No. It's a really good question. It was traumatizing to write. I think that I'm glad I didn't start it too early, because I think writing from a place of hurt and anger risks the author putting out into the world things that, with the fullness of time and hindsight, maybe they wouldn't again. I've certainly seen that, not necessarily with medical memoir, but with other pieces of writing where people reflect on it years later and go, I'm not sure I would have done that again. But nevertheless, you know, when I started it, I was 5-6 years post-training, and even then it was quite traumatizing. But what it forced me to do, and again, I think this is where fiction is really powerful, is in every scene you're trying to write believable interaction, which means that even though it was written from the first person, the actions, behaviors, and words of the other people in those interactions also had to make sense. So you had to know them as a character, as a person, as a consistent character through the whole thing. And so it made me reflect on parallel interactions or similar things that had happened to me, and consider them from all of those perspectives. And I concluded sometimes that the intent was just as malicious as I had thought it was at the time. And at other times, particularly now being a consultant and knowing the pressures that we face now, it made me look at some of those interactions in a different light. So ultimately, even though the writing itself could be traumatizing, I think the whole project has been very healing.
I have a question from Alice online. Thank you, Alice. And I'll just read it verbatim. I found the issue mentioned in the novel of how difficult it can be to manage working as a registrar when you have diabetes or another chronic illness pertinent. What do you think are some solutions to improve this? Yeah, in like 2 minutes, how do you fix that? But I mean, this is fascinating to me that medical professionals are not allowed to be sick in any way.
No, and that includes normal aspects of being a human, such as pregnancy. All of those things not allowed.
A terrible sickness.
Yes, terrible. It lasts a long time. The consequences of that. I think it's always something that has played on my mind. When I was a much younger doctor, I was working at a country hospital, and a colleague at a neighbouring country hospital died in his sleep. He was someone who had epilepsy, and it was known that the nights and irregular sleep patterns and long working hours was making that unstable, with the consequence that he died in the doctor's accommodation. And these are not rare stories. In fact, I doubt it's even identifying, because I suspect it's happened more than once over the years. And so the challenges faced by doctors with health problems is something that has always played on my mind. And even from a very early draft was something that I wanted to include, but not having a chronic disease, I didn't know how to write it. And then what actually happened was around the time that Alan and Unwin bought the manuscript, my middle child was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And all of a sudden I was thrust into this world of, despite being a doctor and understanding the physiology of this condition, of suddenly having to manage it. And the management being unexpectedly for me, minute by minute, day by day, all consuming every single moment of every day. And even now, you know, we'll finish this conversation, I'll open up my phone and I'll check what his blood sugar is, because that's just a thing that I do 25 times a day now. And it suddenly, I thought, okay, I now have the lived experience to write this character. And ultimately, there's only a few little sentences here and there about what that looks like. But that is the problem, because a lot of these conditions do require quite a lot of concentration, quite a lot of intensive management. And when you're on your feet, when you're running around, when you're working long hours, when food is irregular, when sleep is irregular, they become much harder to manage. So what is the solution? We've got to make concessions for people. You know, if you have a doctor with epilepsy and they say, I can't work nights because I'm having more seizures, we've got to take them off nights and not say that's unfair on the other doctors. We've got to work towards equitable solutions rather than equal solutions. And we need to, again, you know, like we talk about caring responsibilities, caring is about caring for yourself as well. And if people have additional care needs for themselves, as an industry, we've got to recognise that.
And also something you mentioned there, that people with illnesses and conditions are not drains on the industry. They can also be incredible assets to their industry. Like, imagine how much poorer the medical profession would be if nobody with any lived experience of any of these conditions ever also worked in that profession.
Absolutely, because they are the drivers of change, because they know where the pressure points and the issues are. They, you know, even little things such as, you know, having a child with diabetes who has this continuous blood glucose monitor, which is a little device that gets stuck on your arm. Up until the 1st of July this year, they weren't funded. So they were $150 for adults per use, and per use is about 7 to 10 days. And they often go on the back of the arm. And, you know, I walked into an operating theatre one day to find my registrars going, what is this thing? And, you know, about to rip it off. And I was like, no, don't take that off. That's, you know, $200 for the patient there. We'll just, you know, put the tourniquet further down. So it's these little things that actually make us better clinicians on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, in that room, 15 people learnt what that is and why you shouldn't take it off. And so we've got to not only support doctors with disabilities and chronic diseases, but we've actively got to bring them in and learn from their experience, I think.
Assets, not liabilities. we're out of time, but I will allow one more question from the audience. Yes, I saw this one first.
What would your advice be?
Vote with your feet is the first thing I would say.
Sorry, just for repeating for those watching, the question was, what would your advice be for a patient dealing with a burnt out doctor?
Oh, burnt out. Sorry, I thought you said a bad doctor. Thank you for repeating the question. A burnt out doctor. Kindness, caring, space to talk. Some of the stories we tell are pretty grim and can be hard to understand for people outside the industry. Black humour can appear callous, but is just a manner of coping, and encouraging rest and reassessment as much as possible, and professional support if they need it.
This is a yes/no question, so I'm adding it in also. A question from Upeksha De Silva. Sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is that someone here?
Yes.
Oh, cheeky double attempt at questions. Anyway, are we going to be reading about Emma's next year of training?
No.
No, that was a no. No worries. Well, thank you so much, Neela. This has been so enlightening, and I love reading your book so much. And I know it sort of resonated for me in this kind of interprofessional level, but it seems like it's resonating for a lot of other people as well. I've no doubt. I think it's a fantastic book. If it's not Emma's next year in training, I cannot wait to see what you do next. Please join me in giving Neela a huge round of applause. Lydia stole my thunder in announcing next month's book. It's all right. It won't happen again. Just kidding. But I do want to take a moment before you leave to read you the blurb for the fantastic novel, The Stranger, which is a feminist Western. All right, here we go. This is so good. In dark water, being female doesn't amount to much. But Chelsea's luckier than most. She's the young lover of the town's feared leader, which she keeps telling herself is a good thing. What with food getting scarce and the wells drying up. She's secure and safe and can almost believe she's happy. But when a stranger rides into town, gun on one hip, whip on the other, Chelsea can't look away, especially when it turns out this stranger is a woman. Nobody can say what the stranger is there for, but she brings talk of an outside perhaps no longer so chaotic, no longer something to hide away from. And she knows far too much about dark choices made in the town when the world outside was falling apart. As the rumors fly about Darkwater's bloodied past and the murder of a woman 20 years earlier, Chelsea finds herself being drawn into someone else's terrifying quest for justice, or is it merely deadly revenge? In a place ruled by fear, Chelsea's going to have to decide whose side she's really on and how far she's prepared to go to uncover the town's dirty secrets before more blood soaks the ground of Darkwater, this time perhaps her own. Original, unflinching, gritty, and visionary, The Stranger is a stunning feminist Western for our times. Ooh, got goosies. All right. That is Thursday, the 1st of September. Thank you so much for having us. Have a lovely night. Thank you.